functional definition of a plant. Plants are photosynthetic eukaryotes, right? Plants are photosynthetic eukaryotes. Photosynthetic eukaryotes. So again, we're going to start with the most basic plant and move on, right? So let's start with Chlamydamonas. These were super primitive plants, right? So what are some characteristics of Chlamydamonas? And if you can try to fit, I know some of y'all have a really big handwriting, but if you can try to fit it in these boxes, it makes it a lot easier to compare the different groups. Okay, so Chlamydamonas are what? They're single cell green algae. What else? Okay, they reproduce via isogamy. They are isogamous. What else? They are aquatic. What else? They are haploid dominant. And what else? They have a single chloroplast. Right, so they can do photosynthesis, but slower, right? Okay? So let's look at the life cycle of Chlamydamonas. Okay? So let's start with an adult. So the adult is haploid. Okay? And the adult will produce what? What does a human adult produce? Gametes, right? They produce isogametes. Okay? Isogametes, haploid or diploid? Haploid. So this process is mitosis. Isogametes will fuse via what process? Syngamy. To produce a zygote, which is diploid. Right? And then what happens next? The zygote will produce so then they produce spores, and then eventually they develop into the adult, right? So it's a pretty simple process, right? So zygote, spores, and then adult, right? So just remember that they are haploid dominant. Right? So what are some primitive features? Like basically every single feature is a primitive feature, right? They're single celled, they're isogamous, they're aquatic, they're haploid dominant, and they have one chloroplast, right? All of those are very primitive features. As plants started moving towards the land, what were some problems that they would face? Water loss, right? Major problem is water loss. Right? And right now, you have swimming gametes, right? You're in water, right? So as you move to land, you need to deal with not having water, right? And being able to fertilize, right? So the very first major group of land plants were the Bryophytes, right? And I'm using markers. I'm going to use larger papers. I'm not going to fit it in the box. But so let's move on to Bryophytes, and these were the first major land plants. Okay. So what are some examples of Bryophytes? Okay, you have mosses, liverworts, and you have hornworts. Okay, and we're going to focus on mosses. These are the most famous ones. And as we go through these, again, I want you to make sure you're making a column for characteristics, right? Characteristics and limitations. So you can compare Bryophytes to Chlamydamonas, Bryophytes to ferns. You can compare gymnosperms to ferns, right? So make sure we have a column that says like characteristics. Okay, so what are some characteristics of bryophytes? Are they single-celled or multicellular? Multicellular. So compared to Chlamydamonas, is that an advanced feature or is it primitive? Advanced. What else? Are they haploid dominant or diploid dominant? They are haploid dominant. So that's still a primitive feature. Isogamy or oogamy? Oogamy. Is that an advancement over Chlamydamonas or is it still primitive? It's an advancement, right? Chlamydamonas were isogamous. Do they do photosynthesis? They have a cuticle on the top. So that's an advancement compared to the Chlamydamonas, but it's primitive to future plants. Right? Future plants have cuticles on both sides, right? And because you don't have cuticles and you don't have a true leaf, you actually don't have true leaves, no true leaves. And that's because you don't have two cuticles, and also those cuticles don't have stomata, right? Okay. So these are major characteristics. What are some limitations? Yeah, they're small. They're small because why? No vascular tissue. Can they live in the desert? No, they're limited to moist environments. Right? Why? Because they have swimming sperm. They have swimming sperm. Okay? And again, make sure you can differentiate each of these groups, right? So pay attention to what each group has and be able to compare it to the group before and the group after, okay? Okay, so now let's talk about the life cycle. So where do y'all want to start in the life cycle? Okay, let's start with, actually, the sporophyte. Y'all always talk about the Chlamydamonas. So let's start with the sporophyte. The sporophyte is diploid or haploid? Diploid, always. And it's called the sporangium in bryophytes. Sporangium. Okay? So the sporophyte produces what? Sporophyte produces spores, which are haploid. The spores will develop into the gametophyte, which is haploid, right? The gametophyte can produce what? Archegonia, which produce eggs, and they also produce antheridia, which produce sperm. Okay? And again, these are mosses. They have what type of sperm? Swimming sperm. So this sperm has to swim from the antheridia to reach the egg and the archegonia, right? So it has to physically swim, right? So you need some moisture for that to happen. Swim. So then you have fertilization occurring in the archegonia, right? And it's fertilization, not syngamy, because you have two types of gametes, right? Sperm and egg. So in the archegonia, you're going to have fertilization. After fertilization, you produce a zygote, right? You produce a zygote. And the zygote is diploid or haploid? Diploid. Okay? And the zygote would develop into the sporangium. Okay? And then let's look at where mitosis and meiosis occurs. From the zygote to the sporangium, you're going from 2N to 2N, so it's mitosis. Sporophyte to spore is meiosis, because you're going from 2N to N. Spore to gametophyte is mitosis, because you're going from N to N, right? Okay. A couple of unique features of the bryophytes, right? So we know it's haploid dominant. So the sporophyte is supported by the gametophyte, right? Haploid dominant means the adult stage, or the adult stage is haploid, right? So for most of the life cycle, it's haploid, right? So the gametophyte, which is much smaller, supports the sporangium, right? So if you actually look at a picture of it, it looks like this. Here's the gametophyte, and here is the sporangium, right? Okay, so the moss sporangium, can it do photosynthesis? No. So moss sporangium, and I'm using brown, right? So no photosynthesis. Is it multicellular? Yes, right? It's pretty big, right? Does it do aerobic respiration? Yes, right? Right, so it does Krebs cycle, it does electron flow, and it does glycolysis, right? Okay, what about the moss gametophyte? It's green, so it's photosynthetic. So it does do photosynthesis. Does it do aerobic respiration? Yes, it's multicellular. Okay, any questions? And again, this is haploid dominant. The gametophyte is supporting the sporophyte. The sporophyte does not produce glucose, right? It doesn't do photosynthesis. So how does the sporophyte get its glucose? From the gametophyte, right? From the gametophyte. Right? Can they be very large? No, because they don't have vascular tissues, right? So the sporangium can't be too big because the gametophyte doesn't have vascular tissue to transport the sugars that far, right? So that is a major limitation, right? It's very small. And again, because they are swimming sperm, they are limited to moist environments. Any questions? Okay, so these are the mosses. Let's move to the next group, the ferns. Okay. Again, let's talk about characteristics. And what is the major characteristics? This is the first time you have the presence of, you have vascular tissues, right? The first time you have vascular tissues. And so this is a major advancement. And what are the two types of vascular tissues? You have xylem, which transports water, right? So you're transporting water from the roots to the leaves, from roots to leaves. And then you have phloem, which transports sugar from roots to leaves and from leaves to roots. So phloem moves both ways, right? Okay, so this is a major advancement because now your plants can be much taller, right? Makes plants much taller. Okay, what are some other features of ferns? Oogamy or isogamy? Oogamy. Multicellular or single cell? Multicellular. Diploid dominant or haploid dominant? Diploid dominant. Diploid dominant. right? This is the first time you have the presence of diploid dominance, right? What does that mean? You actually have a free-living gametophyte, and you have a free-living sporophyte. Right? The gametophyte is no longer supporting the sporophyte. Okay? Questions so far? Okay, so what are some limitations? Yeah, so you still have swimming sperm. Okay. So because you have vascular tissues, you can now grow taller, but you still need moisture for fertilization, right? So you can't go into super dry areas. Okay? Any questions? Okay, so let's go into the life cycle. And let's start somewhere else. So let's start with the gametophytes this time. Okay, the gametophytes, again, they are free-living, and they're free-living. What color are they? They're actually green. So do they do photosynthesis? Yes. Are they multicellular? Yes. So do they do aerobic respiration? Yes. So that's the gametophyte. The gametophytes produce what? Archegonia and antheridia. Archegonia produces the egg. Antheridia produces the sperm. Right, and again, it's swimming sperm. And in most cases, you actually have, on a single gametophyte, both the antheridia and the archegonia, so that the antheridia, the sperm, can just swim to the archegonia on the single gametophyte, right? So a lot of times, if this is the gametophyte, you're going to have the archegonia and the antheridia on the same one, so that makes it a lot easier to swim, right? Okay? So again, the sperm will have to swim to the egg, and fertilization occurs in the archegonia, right? Fertilization. Fertilization produces a zygote, which is diploid. Okay? Like always, the zygote develops into what? The sporophyte, which is 2N. Okay? And the sporophyte contains sporangium, right? Contains sporangium on the undersides of the leaves, right? On the underside of leaf. And that produces, sporophyte always produces spores, which are haploid. The spore produces what? The gametophyte. And again, what color is the sporophyte? Green. So does it do photosynthesis? Yes. It's multicellular, so it does aerobic respiration. Okay. So now let's look at mitosis versus meiosis. From spore to gametophyte, you have mitosis. From sporophyte to spore, it is meiosis. Right? And from zygote to sporophyte, you have mitosis. Any questions? Is this getting easier? Hopefully, right? Okay. It's the same pattern, right? Just over and over and over. Okay, so that's Ferns. Okay. And let's flip to the back page, the very last page. And earlier in the first cover, the front cover, we talked about heterospory versus homospory, right? And gymnosperm is the first time you have heterospory, right? So now let's start to talk about gymnosperm. started